tried to force the government to intervene. Their main concern was to settle a national minimum wage instead of rates fixed district by district. So they were fighting a losing battle. All over the country, in every industry, wages were brutally cut, and the union leaders were powerless. The unions had hoped to gain power through the new General Council of the TUC, but the government was not in the mood to listen. By the end of 1925, a showdown looked inevitable. All the big unions passed resolutions in support of the miners, even if it meant a general strike. The TUC General Council, still hoping for a last-minute solution, didn't lay any definite plans. They did not see themselves as revolutionary, but the rank and file were bitterly determined. The miners' leaders left their headquarters convinced that the whole movement would stand behind them in the event of a strike. The miners' president heard old school of cloth cap, iron-fisted trade unionism. In negotiations, his favourite reply was, "Now doing." A.J. Cook, the General Secretary, was a Welsh firebrand, a passionate orator. He coined the miners' slogan, "Not a minute on the day, not a penny off the pay." One cabinet minister remarked, "I thought the miners' leaders were the stupidest men in England, until I met the owners." With coal production dropping steadily and the whole industry collapsing round their ears, they remained blind to any consideration but the need to cut wages in the use of profit. The General Council, through its negotiating committee, did its best to find a middle way. So did the Prime Minister, Stanley Baldwin, who was a mild and peaceful. But he was under pressure from his ministers tried like him to smooth things over. But another, more powerful group, led by Winston Churchill, Chancellor of the Exchequer, was determined to force a fight. Negotiations collapsed, and at midnight, May the 3rd, 1926, the general strike began. On the first day, more than 1 million workers came out, in addition to the 1 million mine workers involved in the lockout. Vast numbers of others waited impatiently in the second line of attack. That morning, with no public transport, city streets were snarled up by chaotic traffic jams. As for the strikers, the TUC reported a quiet, orderly, and good-tempered desire to keep the peace. The government's appeal for volunteers was answered by thousands, mostly from the middle class. Detachments of sea cadets were sent to work the mines, without much success. At the docks, university undergraduates were ready and eager, but not particularly efficient. The railways were the most popular, quite a change from the office. After a day or two, the volunteers got some of the trains moving, but they were accident-prone and invariably late. The government had laid elaborate plans for the moving of essential food supplies. Volunteers and troops were used, and parks were filled with milk jugs. Often the strike committees lent a hand. They didn't want anyone to starve. With all the regular newspapers shut down, one source of news was the government's official gazette, exuberantly edited by Mr. Churchill. Later, other papers put out small emergency editions, but most people relied on the BBC for news of the strike. Volunteer bus drivers were protected by the police, but usually encountered little more than jeers. One thing, though, that did arouse resentment was the use of troops and armoured cars to escort supplies to the docks. For the most part, the strikers offered little resistance, though there were one or two minor clashes with police in the East End of London. Some people thought that the swashbuckling activities of Mr. Churchill, always ready to bring in the troops and tanks, were a deliberate incitement to violence. In some cities, especially in the north, the strikers were more ferocious. In Doncaster, thousands of pickets, mostly miners, tried to block the roads. In Glasgow, in Newcastle, there were ugly scenes as strikers clashed with police on the town mall. Yet miraculously, no one was killed during the strike. Labour politician ruefully remarked, "The English are too sane for revolution." After a week of handing out strike pay, the union's funds were running low. The leaders knew that they couldn't last out much longer and were looking for a way to reopen negotiations. The most anxious to end the strike was Jimmy Thomas, the railwaymen's leader, who had a great respect for authority and was afraid the strikers might get out of hand. He called in a middleman, Sir Herbert Samuel, and without informing the miners, he and other members of the General Council decided that the strike must be called off, even though Baldwin refused to give any firm promise to meet their grievances. The strikers felt bewildered and betrayed. For 2 more days they refused to go back to work. They didn't trust the government or their leaders. When they got back, many were victimized by the employers. The miners dug in for the finish, more obstinate and embittered than ever. Although they were almost starving and their families were living on charity, for 6 more months they fought their lonely battle. But the government gave way to the owners, and the miners were forced back to work for longer hours and lower wages. They were utterly beaten. The coal crisis threw thousands more out of work. The labour exchanges were besieged by men looking desperately for employment. But as the depression dragged on, many resigned themselves to the possibility that they might never work again. The Communist Party gained in strength and organised angry demonstrations. Trade union membership fell by more than 2 million. But the TUC was lucky in its leaders. Ernest Bevin, boss of the transport workers, and Walter Citrine, the efficient general secretary, their dogged hard work saved the unions from collapse and disunity. The lean years following the strike brought another hard lesson. No miracle could be expected from a Labour government. In 1924 and 1929, Ramsay MacDonald was Prime Minister, but the Labour Party never had a clear majority, and his governments were brief and ineffectual. MacDonald himself had no time for what he called the whirlpool of class-conscious trade unionists. During his first government, he saw the TUC General Secretary once for 5 minutes. His desertion of his own party in 1931 to form a national government with Baldwin was a bitter blow for Labour. No government could do anything to restore life and vitality to the depressed industrial town. Bevin and other trade union leaders suggested ambitious schemes for public works, but the politicians ignored them. Their alternative was a humiliating system of public charity, the dole, and free soup for the children. From the hungry towns of the north, Hartlepool, Newcastle, Jarrow, Glasgow, ragged armies of unemployed plodded along the road to London. Hunger marches disturbed the public conscience and annoyed the politicians, but they could only be an outlet for despair. The trade unions sympathised, but did not take part. Gradually, during 1935 and 36, the black cloud of depression began to lift a little, and the number of unemployed dropped slowly but surely. At last, the government made an assault on the slums. In the large cities, thousands of families were moved from squalid back-to-backs and rehoused in new council flats. There was more time and money to spend on pleasure, and a week's paid holiday a year. Industry came to life again, and the newer industries, such as the mass production of cars, began at last to prosper. By 1939, the growing danger of war with Germany brought the need to rearm.